When is the people allowed to rebel against their incarceration, their ethnic cleansing, their abolition from the face of the earth? When is a war crime turning into genocide? You know, remarkable scholars, and most of them Jewish, did a lot of great work defining those limits, and we have.
Yanis Varoufakis, former finance minister of Greece, one of the sharpest economic minds on the planet, just walked on to Piers Morgan's show and did something that almost never happens on mainstream television. He brought the actual receipts, not talking points, not emotional appeals, not the usual cable news performance, to document a historical record of exactly how we got here. The 2015 Iran nuclear deal that worked, verified by cameras, sensors, and international inspectors on the ground, that Trump ripped up not because it was broken, but because Israel asked him to. The fact that this administration launched a war in the Middle East with no plan B, and lamentably, as Varoufakis put it, with no plan A either, while the national debt races toward $39 trillion, while gas prices sit above $4.40 a gallon, while working families are being told to be patriotic about a conflict nobody in Washington can explain how to win. This is the conversation the establishment does not want trending. I'm Justin. This is Justin Speaks. Hit that like button, subscribe, and stay locked in, because the full breakdown is at the end, and it is going to connect every single dot.
Well, look, I am a very fierce opponent of nuclear weapons. I was, back in the time when I lived in Britain, I was a paid-up member of CND. So I'm never going to support anyone's right to own or to develop a nuclear weapon. But we live in a world where, the West is so complicit and so duplicitous. On the one hand, you have Israel that has violated every nuclear proliferation or anti-proliferation treaty there is. Nobody's talking about the nuclear weapons that Israel has.
Well, they don't even admit having them, do they?
Indeed. So they've broken every rule and regulation. Nobody's talking about it. Now, Piers, I don't think that Iran wants to develop a nuclear weapon. I mean, the previous Khamenei, the elder, the late Khamenei, I should say, took out a fatwa. I believe it was genuine. My understanding of what the Iranian government wants is they want to maintain their sovereign right to enrich uranium so that, if needs be, they can have a bomb. But they don't want to have a bomb because they've seen what happened.
But isn't that a large leap of faith, though, in a regime which, I mean, at best, this is a regime, it may well be a functioning regime, but it's unbelievably repressive to its own people. I think it's undeniable that it has funded and provided arms to Hezbollah, to the Houthis, to Hamas over the last 2 decades more. This is a very unpleasant regime which has promoted terrorism around the world and terrorized its own people. I mean, let's not get too ahead of ourselves, surely, in sort of saying, well, actually, they're not that bad, so therefore we should trust them about the enriched uranium, which they're enriching at quite a rate. We should trust them about other areas of how they go about their business. Should we?
Well, let me answer in 2 points, with 2 points. The first one is you should never trust anyone, especially when it comes to nuclear weapons. You should trust and verify. But I remember the short stint I had in government, I also had the honor of having a brief discussion with Barack Obama in the White House. And this was in April 2015. I wanted to talk to him about Greece's debt disaster and our awful economic crisis. He didn't want to talk to me about that. He wanted to talk to me about how proud he was of his deal with Iran and with the European Union. Because that deal, you will recall, included extremely arduous verification processes. All the Iranian facilities would have been open for inspection by international inspectors. There would be cameras, there would be sensors, there would be everything that is necessary in order to trust and verify. So that's the first part of the question. Ironically, isn't it terribly ironic that if you think about it, the best that Donald Trump can get now is something like that agreement that Obama had already struck with the Iranians and the Europeans, and the Germans were really very, very gung-ho about it, including Angela Merkel, the chancellor at the time. and which then Donald Trump, the moment he was elected, not because he had any strong opinions about this, he just wanted to bring down anything that Obama had done, and it was a direct request by Israel. But the second thing I want to say, allow me, I need to say that Iran is the only country that has not invaded any of its neighbors. It was invaded brutally by Iraq. That invasion saw 600,000 people die in Iran. Chemical weapons were used with the acknowledgement of support or, turning a blind eye of the West. The Houthis, the Hamas, the Hezbollah, partisans, guerrillas, call them terrorists, call them whatever you want. I don't call them terrorists. That Iran did support, where they are how shall I put it? They are movements that sprang out of many years of mishandling of the Middle East, let's put it very mildly, by the West. I mean, Hezbollah would never have happened. It would never have existed if Israel had not brutally invaded Lebanon in 1982. And then the Iranians supported them and funded them. Now, do you consider Hezbollah to be terrorists? Well, if you come from the Israeli side, yes. If you come from the Shiite population of South Lebanon, you consider them to be a lifeline. So, let's be nuanced about that.
But when you say, but Yanis, when you say that Hamas are not terrorists, I mean, what we all witnessed on October the 7th was 3,000 people charging over a border and committing heinous acts of terror against any civilians they could get their hands on. And some military, but predominantly civilians. They were kidnapping babies, they kidnapped Holocaust survivors, they slaughtered young people at a music festival, they were bombing, setting fire to things, and so on. This is surely the most blatant act of terrorism imaginable. Why would you not categorize Hamas, at the very least post-October 7th, as terrorists?
I consider those to be hideous and heinous war crimes. And there's no two way about that.
But why not terrorism?
Well, because you see, I have a problem with terrorism because, the IRA used to be terrorist until we had the Good Friday Agreement. And then they became partners in peace. Nelson Mandela was admonished as a terrorist when I lived in England. Margaret Thatcher, I remember calling him a terrorist. And then he became one of the greatest statesmen in the world. So I have a problem with the word terror because you see the whole point about the hideousness of human endeavors when it comes to defeating one another is to terrorize one another. So I do believe in international law. International law is very clear. What happened, what you described, were war crimes. And I have no problem condemning them as war crimes. What I do not condemn, however, is an attempt by anyone, not just Palestinians, but by anyone, to escape an illegal fence around the open-air prison concentration camp that has been erected in order to deny them the human dignity. The whole existence of Gaza is not a country. Remember that. When they say, I remember when everybody was talking about the war between Israel and Gaza is not a country. It was an open prison camp or a concentration camp that was effectively utilized in order to propagate ethnic cleansing and a slow genocide. So, of course, these are extremely delicate distinctions to make, but they're very important distinctions to make. I recognize the right of Ukrainians to kill Russians when Russians are invading Ukraine, right? I do not recognize the right of Ukrainians to kill Russian civilians intentionally. So we have to stick to the great success of the human spirit in 1945 of introducing international law, whereby we have very clear definitions of what is allowed in war. When is a people allowed to rebel against their incarceration, their ethnic cleansing, their abolition from the face of the earth? When is a war crime turning into genocide? Remarkable scholars, and most of them Jewish, did a lot of great work defining those limits, and we have to that, has it?
The third question people raise is now the war is at the stage it's at, a month in. Is it not essential for the future of the region, of the wider world, that Israel and the United States win that war? What do you say to people that argue that? In other words, the lesser of two evils.
Well, I'm sorry, that's the greatest of the two evils. Here you have an unlawful war started by Israel and by the United States. It's a criminal war. Anybody who tells me that the right solution to that is for the United States and Israel to win is essentially telling me that they have no concern at all about international law, and they would like to see the violators of international law be the victors. I can't see that.
What do you think is going to happen here, Yanis? Because, like I said at the start, I think Trump has made a big miscalculation. I think he was urged into doing this by Benjamin Netanyahu, who told him the people will rise up once we decapitate the leadership. We've got them all in our sights. We can take out the Ayatollah and then the rest will follow. And it just hasn't followed that way. And in fact, the Iranians have been waging kind of asymmetrical war, which has not meant meeting might with might. But
let's talk about what Yanis Varoufakis actually laid out in that interview, because it was not political commentary. It was an economic and historical autopsy of a foreign policy disaster that was entirely predictable and entirely preventable. And the fact that it was delivered on Piers Morgan's show, a platform that has been broadly supportive of the administration's framing of this conflict, made it even more significant, because Piers could not dismiss it, because the facts Varoufakis brought were not contestable. They were just inconvenient. Start with the JCPOA, because it is the foundation of everything, and the American public has been systematically denied an honest accounting of what it actually was and why it matters so much right now. The 2015 Iran nuclear deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, was not a handshake agreement built on trust. It was one of the most rigorously verified arms control agreements in modern diplomatic history. Cameras inside Iranian nuclear facilities, sensors monitoring enrichment levels in real time, international inspectors with access to declared sites on a regular basis. Iran's uranium enrichment was capped at 3.67%. Their enriched uranium stockpile was reduced by 98%. The breakout time, the estimated time it would take Iran to produce enough material for a nuclear weapon, was extended from approximately 2 to 3 months to at least 12 months. Barack Obama, Angela Merkel, the European Union, the United Nations, and the International Atomic Energy Agency all confirmed it was working. Rafael Grossi, the head of the IAEA, confirmed it was working. James Mattis, Trump's own Secretary of Defense, said, "Don't tear it up. It's working." Israeli security officials said, "Don't tear it up." Trump tore it up anyway, not because the intelligence said it was failing, not because Iran had violated its terms, but because Israel asked him to. That is Varoufakis' documented claim, and it is supported by the public record. The moment Trump withdrew from the deal in 2018, and Iran's enrichment began accelerating. By the time this war started, Iran had 400 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%. The deal that was working, that had been working for 3 years, was gone, replaced by nothing. No alternative framework, no renegotiation, no diplomatic off-ramp, just maximum pressure and the assumption that Iran would capitulate. They did not capitulate. They enriched, and now the administration that destroyed the mechanism for verifying and containing Iran's nuclear program is fighting a war whose stated justification is Iran's nuclear capability. The war is a direct consequence of the policy that created the threat it claims to be solving. Varoufakis said it, and he was right. The best outcome Trump can hope for now is something resembling the deal Obama already had. The deal Trump destroyed, the deal that was working. Let that register fully. The no plan A argument is the one that makes every official statement about this war impossible to take seriously, and Varoufakis delivered it with a precision that only an economist with a deep understanding of strategic game theory can bring. He said Trump flip-flops between calling for negotiations and promising total destruction, as if this creates constructive ambiguity that will threaten the Iranian government. They will not. Constructive ambiguity works when the party you are trying to threaten believes the threat is credible and consistent. Iran has been preparing for an American military confrontation for 40 years. They have built their entire military doctrine around the assumption that one day America would do exactly what it has done. Their tunnel networks, their drone program, their missile arsenal, their Hormuz closure strategy, their proxy network across the region, all of it was built with this scenario in mind. And Trump walked into it with no plan for what happens when Iran does not collapse, when the people do not rise up, when the regime does not fracture, when the strait stays closed, when the economic pressure flows in both directions. The Pentagon war gamed this. The intelligence community modeled this. Senior officials warned about this specifically. Trump was told the strait would close. He dismissed the warning because he expected the war to be over before it became relevant. It was not over. The strait closed. And now the administration that had no plan A is improvising in real time, while the global economy absorbs the consequences. The Hormuz economic weapon argument is the one that mainstream financial media has consistently underplayed, and that Varoufakis identified with clinical precision. Iran controls a choke point through which 20% of the world's daily oil supply flows. Not 10%, not a marginal amount, 20% every day, including the oil and gas that heats European homes, including the fertilizer precursors that flow from Gulf production facilities to global agricultural supply chains, including the shipping routes that carry manufactured goods between Asia and the West. When Iran closed the strait, it did not just create an oil price problem, it created a global supply chain disruption that is working its way through every sector of the economy simultaneously. Gas at $4.40 a gallon. In May 2026, food prices rising because fertilizer costs are embedded in the price of everything grown anywhere on Earth. Shipping costs rising because rerouting around the strait adds weeks and thousands of dollars to every journey. Manufacturing costs rising because component parts and raw materials are caught in the disruption. Varoufakis identified this as utterly predictable. Of course, they would close the strait. He said he cannot believe there were people in the Pentagon who did not foresee this. And here is the answer to that disbelief. There were people in the Pentagon who foresaw it. They warned about it. Trump dismissed the warning because he thought the war would be over in days, because Netanyahu told him the people would rise up, because Venezuela had gone smoothly and he transferred that confidence to a country 3 times the size with 40 years of preparation for exactly this scenario. The economic consequences American families are living with right now, at the gas pump, at the grocery store, in their energy bills, are the direct result of a strategic miscalculation made by a president who ignored the warnings of his own military and intelligence apparatus. That is not a partisan statement. That is the documented sequence of events. The debt and defense spending numbers are the ones that expose the full obscenity of this moment, and they need to be stated with their full weight. The United States national debt has crossed $38.9 trillion, nearly $39 trillion. The Defense Department base budget alone is $849 billion. Total national defense spending is approaching $1 trillion. $1 trillion per year to finance a military that wants to war with no plan A, that dismissed warnings about the consequences, that is now improvising an exit strategy for a conflict whose mission statement has changed every 10 seconds by Varoufakis' count. And while that trillion-dollar machine burns through borrowed money at a rate that is genuinely generational in its consequences, meaning your children and your grandchildren will be paying this debt, American families are being told that their inability to afford groceries is a sacrifice worth making for a war they never voted for, that was never taken to Congress, that was launched without a single Democratic mandate. This is the arrangement Varoufakis was describing when he talked about the working class paying the invoice for the arrogance of the political elite. It is not a metaphor. It is the documented mathematical reality of what is happening to the American economy in real time. The Roman Empire analogy Varoufakis offered is the one that cuts deepest and deserves the most honest reflection. He said he hopes Trump does what the late Roman emperors did when their legions were defeated in Germany. He hopes Trump declares victory when he has won nothing and retreats, because the alternative, boots on the ground, escalation of the ladder, a Houthi blockade of the Suez, a full energy market catastrophe, is genuinely catastrophic for everyone, including Americans, including the soldiers who would be sent, and including the families who would wait at home. He said he very much fears the escalation ladder is becoming an escalator. Robert Pape said the same thing John Mearsheimer said the same thing. Professor Jang said the same thing. Every serious strategic analyst who has examined this conflict from outside the administration's echo chamber has reached the same conclusion. The exit options are bad, the escalation options are worse, and the administration that created this situation has demonstrated no capacity for the kind of strategic humility that would be required to take the bad exit before the worse options become inevitable. Here's the bottom line. Yanis Varoufakis sat across from Piers Morgan and delivered the most honest assessment of this war that has appeared on a mainstream platform since it began. No plan A, no plan B, a working nuclear agreement destroyed at Israel's request, a 40-year preparation by Iran for exactly this confrontation, a Hormuz closure that was utterly predictable and was in fact predicted by the people whose warnings were dismissed, a national debt approaching $39 trillion being used to finance a conflict whose mission has changed every 10 seconds, and whose definition of victory nobody in Washington can coherently articulate, and American families at gas stations and grocery stores paying the price for every one of those failures. The emperor has no clothes, no strategy, no exit, and no intention of taking accountability for the economic crater this war has created in the lives of ordinary Americans. This channel exists to say that plainly, every time, without apology, without the sanitized version that lets the architects of this disaster off the hook. Like this video, share it with someone who still thinks this war was inevitable and unavoidable. Subscribe to Justin Speaks and come back, because we are going to keep following the money, following the facts, and following this war wherever it leads with the honesty it demands and the accountability it requires. So we'll see you in the next one.